Welcome to Sabby Sabs podcast. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. My special guest tonight is Eric London. He is a writer for the World Socialist website, and he is the author of Agents, the FBI and GPU Infiltration of the Trotskyist Movement. Welcome, Eric. Thanks so much for coming on.
Hi there, Sabrina. Thank you for having me.
So, Eric, I show a lot of articles on this show from the World Socialist website. One of the issues that we've been talking about recently are the problems with DSA and how we believe that democratic socialism actually is not enough. And it was actually a video I saw from a YouTuber called Second Thought. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but he did an entire video explaining the economic breakdown about why democratic socialism actually is not enough because it still operates in a capitalist system. And I know you have a similar opinion. So first, I do want to talk to you about that. What do you feel are some of the problems with DSA, the organization in general, and democratic socialism?
Okay, well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on. I wouldn't say that the DSA or democratic socialism isn't enough. The DSA is a capitalist organization. It's a part of the pro-imperialist Democratic Party. That's the role the DSA has played since its founding in the early 1980s, even from before then. So not to quibble, but it's actually the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, all its associated publications, Jacobin, Socialist Forum, etc. They're simply a part of the capitalist imperialist political establishment. Our criticism isn't that they should be something else. It's that workers and young people who are interested in socialism should know what they actually are, what their history is, what their class character is, and what role they play in the two-party system.
Interesting. What's your take on, we've talked about the railroad strike or the railroad workers attempting to go on strike. And we've talked about, the squad in Congress choosing to be strike breakers in a sense, even though we know that that legislation was not going to pass in that way. But it's still the principle, I think, for a lot of us is like, if you are a democratic socialist, you are not supposed to be a strike breaker. Now, we did see that DSA did issue a statement when that did happen, and they said that they were disappointed with the actions of people like AOC, but they approved of the actions of Rashida Tlaib because she did not vote in that way. What's your take on this? I know DSA has spoken out against some of these actions that squad members have taken that really do not follow DSA principles. But why do you feel that an organization like DSA is not holding them more accountable?
Well, actually, the issue that you're raising gets exactly to the role that the DSA plays, because they have to walk this tightrope. Their politicians, the members of their organization who they are accountable to, who are accountable to them, as you said, they all voted to scab on the railroad strike. They voted, and I think those who are watching and listening have to understand, there were 100,000 railroad workers who wanted to strike. Now you've seen in East Palestine, Ohio, by the way, the implications of the DSA's vote and the absolutely devastating and criminal impact that the policies of the rail carriers like Norfolk Southern have had on the rail industry and on these communities, on the working class as a whole. But the DSA tries to, their political representatives, their figures play a role, which is to suppress the class struggle. That's what the railroad vote was proof of. Now, when the organization comes out and says, oh, well, we disagree with that, I mean, it's a meaningless, totally meaningless statement, just like statements by the DSA, which claim that they're anti-war. But what they're trying to do, and this gets to, we've used the term, the DSA's role as a catchment area for the Democratic Party, because their entire purpose, and this has been the case since Michael Harrington founded the organization in 1982, and since the predecessor organization, the Democratic Socialist Organizing Committee, was formed in 1972, their purpose is to take leftward moving young people and workers who associate themselves with socialism and to bring them into the Democratic Party where their left-wing aspirations can be stifled and moved behind the Biden administration in this case.
Interesting. See, this is something that we've kind of had a feeling that this is what was going on. What do you think it's going to take to wake more people up to this? Now, I did see that DSA has lost a good amount of members in the past year or so, like 10,000 members have left DSA. Do you think that this is part of the reason that they're not actually upholding their principles of the organization?
Well, so a lot of people joined the Democratic Socialists of America thinking that they had something to do with socialism. That was a mistake on their part, but there aren't any other organizations aside from the Socialist Equality Party which present themselves as socialist. And so many people who joined the DSA figured that they were joining an organization which was against war, which was against the two parties. But what they didn't realize was that, as I indicated, the entire history of the DSA, and I mean, you really do have to, in order to understand the class character of an organization, you have to understand its roots. And Michael Harrington, who himself came out of he was the progeny of an individual named Max Shachtman. Now, I won't get into all the history because we don't have time here, but Harrington founded this organization explicitly on the basis of serving as a pro-State Department, pro-American imperialism type of organization, initially during the period of the Vietnam War, but this developed over the course of the 70s through the Carter administration. Ever since, they've played the role of essentially somewhat of a left criticism of the Democratic Party establishment, but really ultimately serving to block young people and workers from breaking with the Democratic Party and from looking for socialist internationalist politics. So that's sort of what it is an operation. I mean, it comes from the state. There's no question about that. So I hope I haven't.
Yeah. I was going to say, thank you so much for making that very clear to people, because I think some people still don't really understand that. And I think that what you pointed out brings up something, and I want to highlight this comment here because DJK said its founder, same thing. Michael Harrington stated explicitly that the DSA is part of the Democrats. And I think this is important for people to understand, because then they will realize why, or get a true sense of why these squad members in Congress are not pushing back against Democrat leadership, because again, they're still a part of that party and they also don't want to lose their seats. But if this is an operation of sorts, like you say, then it all becomes clear.
Exactly. So that's why if you take the Ukraine war, and it's very much related to the railroad issue, because American imperialism, in order to dominate the world, has to suppress the working class here at home. And so when the entire DSA slate votes to give $40 billion to the Bandera-aligned Ukrainian government and its military to prolong and escalate the war in Ukraine, this is part and parcel of the role that the DSA has played for very many years. If I can quote briefly, Michael Harrington gave an interview in the New York Times in 1984, and he said the following, which is really important for understanding their whole character. He said, "When I criticize American foreign policy, our intervention in Central America," keep in mind this was a period when American imperialism was backing dictatorships across Latin America. This continues today, of course, but there were genocidal campaigns being carried out in Guatemala and El Salvador and Honduras, etc. But Harrington said, "When I criticize American foreign policy, our intervention in Central America, I do that in the name of the national security of the United States. Our critique is that President Reagan's policy with regard to Nicaragua does not promote national security, it hurts it." In other words, that's the end of the quote. In other words, proceeding totally from the basis of how to best carry out the interests of American imperialism. And that's the same role that they're playing today.
There's a question here from Danny. I think this is a good question. Is the DSA subject to DNC rules and regulations, to your knowledge?
Unofficially, yes. Many of its leaders, including one of its vice chairs, David Duhalde, was himself a former official of the Democratic National Committee. By the way, recently, we've heard that a number of DSA chapters have actually had DSA leadership bring figures associated with the Pentagon in to talk to the clubs about why they must support the war in Ukraine. So, for example, you may have seen this, but for example, there was an individual in Seattle named Dennis Bonder, who's a Tulane University professor. He's won grants from DARPA. He's won awards from the U.S. Army. He was brought in by the leadership of the DSA in Seattle, Washington, to talk to the members of the DSA about why they have to get behind the U.S. efforts to escalate the war against Russia, which is a nuclear-armed power, as you know. So that's when we say, are they taking orders from the DNC? Is it in the DNC's statutes? I don't know about that, but it's certainly in its political DNA.
This is very interesting to hear, and it does explain why they have, supported this conflict here between Russia and Ukraine, why they have not tried to advocate for some type of peace, which more and more people are starting to call for. It just all makes sense in the way that they vote in reference to legislation when it comes to sending billions of dollars to Ukraine. So I'm curious, knowing what you know, do you support the strategy of putting progressives through the Democratic Party?
No, not at all. In no way. I mean, the challenge of the socialist movement has always been to develop a movement in the working class which is conscious of its revolutionary role. That applies here in the United States. This is a working class which is extremely oppressed. It's extremely, as you know, anti-communism has been an official state religion in the United States for over a century. Our role is not to try and work through the Democratic Party. I mean, the Democratic Party has been around for 200 years. It was the party of slavery, the party of Indian removal, the party of Japanese internment, the party of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and Korea and Vietnam and Iraq twice and Syria and Libya, et cetera, et cetera. There is no changing this imperialist organization, which is drenched in blood. And same with the Republicans. And the obligation of socialists in this country and all around the world is to fight to give the working class the understanding that it has to have, which is not going to come through bourgeois media, is not going to come through the two-party system, of the fact that it is tremendously powerful. And if it is armed with a socialist perspective, it is going to be capable in alliance and in collaboration with its brothers and sisters in every single country around the world of bringing an end to the capitalist system. And that's the only thing that's going to stop the Biden administration and the two parties from waging a nuclear war against Russia.
What do you think about Kshama Sawant's new organization, Workers Strike Back? Now, that is officially launching on March 4th. Apparently, that's also the same day that Marianne Williamson is scheduled to make an announcement. I think we all know what that announcement is going to be, possibly that she is going to primary Joe Biden. What do you think about that particular organization working on the outside? Like Kshama Sawant and her group, Socialist Alternative, they're trying to get something out there in the streets for workers' rights, to get people to come together, at least on those issues, kind of the way that Chris Smalls did with the Amazon workers, but this more so on a national scale. How do you feel about something like that? People getting aligned with that instead of focusing on like this strategy of putting progressives through the Democratic Party?
Well, the problem with Kshama Sawant and that strategy is that Socialist Alternative has spent the last 2 years promoting the Democratic Socialists of America. So Kshama Sawant herself entered the DSA, I think it was at the end of 2020, and presented this as a great vehicle for the transformation of American society. That has been exposed as a completely bankrupt and disastrous decision, which she and her organization made. Now, they didn't issue any explanation for how they led their entire membership into the Democratic Party. So I think this Workers Fight Back strikes one as more of an act of desperation to distract from their decision to work within the DSA and the Democratic Party. So there's obviously a desire on the part of so many people for a genuinely independent working class perspective. And there are all these traps being set up by Socialist Alternative, by the DSA. The challenge is, and I think what distinguishes the World Socialist website and the Socialist Equality Party here, we're fighting to mobilize the rank and file. You know, there was a candidate who ran for the president of the UAW named Will Lehman. He won almost 5,000 votes on an explicitly socialist revolutionary program to transform not only the auto industry, but the world economy. He won a substantial amount of votes in Texas and Tennessee and Kansas, Missouri, all over the country. It showed there is an audience for socialism. But it's time to stop dumbing it down. It's time to stop pretending like there has to be the Democratic Party is the end-all, be-all of all social movements, when every lesson from history shows that it's the graveyard.
What do you mean when you say that Socialist Alternative supports the Democratic Party? I'm asking you to elaborate on that, because I've interviewed Kshama Sawant multiple times and they denounced that. So I'm curious, could you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would encourage, by the way, there was an article which Kayla Costa, who's another World Socialist website writer, and I wrote, I think about 6 weeks ago, on Workers Strike Back. Because, yeah, we have to take these, we take people at their word, but we also take people on the basis of what their entire organizational experience is. You don't judge someone based on what they say about themselves. You judge them, and especially if they're a political person, based on what they've done. So Kshama Sawant is someone who's got some experience in politics in Seattle, and she's been endorsed by a number of Democratic Party organizations. She was promoting AOC. She was promoting Jayapal. And I think, by the way, I don't want to forget about this, but the experience with the Progressive Caucus in October, when they wrote this letter calling for negotiations and then rescinded it within 24 hours. AOC, by the way, said that was an example of maturity. She said that only real politicians understand the responsibility that they have. In fact, it was an abject lesson in the total cowardice of the pseudo-left. But Sawant plays a similar role, and I think they're trying to set themselves up to be the next catchment area because of this crisis, which has developed in the DSA.
Okay, the reason why I asked that question is because on Socialist Alternative's website, it explicitly states here, under for a new political party for working people, it says unions and social movement organizations should stop funding and supporting the Democratic and Republican parties and instead organize independent left-wing anti-corporate candidates and coalitions as a first step towards building a workers' party. So again, like I've interviewed Kshama Sawant multiple times on this show, and every time she's come on, she has denounced the Democratic Party and the two-party system as a whole. She actually did not run through the Democratic Party. So I think I'm just a little bit confused here. When she came on to talk about Worker Strike Back, she came on the night that it was announced, and she explained explicitly what this organization is about. And I even asked her if there was a plan to run candidates, and she said that is not the focus at this point in time. It's organizing labor movements. So I'm just curious. Again, I haven't seen any proof that they've put people into the Democratic Party.
Well, except I would ask her the next time you speak to her, how can she explain the fact that she has, and I'm not making it about her as an individual. In fact, the World Socialist website, by the way, defended her from the fascist attacks that were coming from the far right when she was in the city council. But we disagree with her fundamentally on what our conception of socialism is, because her conception is that you can do it by joining the Democratic Party, which is the DSA. The DSA is not something which is different than the Democratic Party. So
no, I'm sorry. Kshama Sawant has never said that. Again, she's been on this show multiple times. She has never said... No, she has never said to join the Democratic Party, not once. In fact, she said the opposite. And she's also had these conversations on bad faith with Brianna Joy Gray and has said the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Right. But the point is, politically, it's not just what people say about themselves. Why did she then join the DSA at precisely the moment when the DSA was supporting imperialist war, when the DSA was voting to crush the railroad strike? Now, right after those votes,
no. She didn't join the DS. I'm sorry, Eric. I'm sorry. She did not join the DSA at that point in time. Kshama Sawant was a part of the DSA before that happened. Like, she never denied that. She always said that she was a part of DSA and a part of Socialist Alternative. Many people are a part of both. And some people are a part of the DSA with hopes that maybe they can move some of those people over from the DSA to Socialist Alternative. Some people are a part of DSA because that was during a time when we all still supported the squad, including people like AOC, and we thought that was the right direction to go. So I think there's a big difference between saying that some of the people that are a part of Socialist Alternative are also a part of DSA, and saying that the organization as a whole, Socialist Alternative, is trying to move people into the Democratic Party. Those are two different things.
Okay, well, we would probably respectfully disagree on that. The main point that I'm trying to convey in response to your question on Sawant, though, is, again, what does it say about an organization if they've encouraged everybody to join the DSA, which is a part of the Democratic Party, at precisely the moment the DSA is preparing, again, to corral this opposition back into the safe channels of the Democratic Party, back behind the war drive against Russia? It's not even a war drive. It's now basically a confrontation between the U.S. and Russia. So, I mean, setting aside the differences with Kshama Sawant, they're responding to the crisis which is broken out in the DSA. As you said, I think about 12,000 people have left the DSA. So that's a lot of people who, as you were just indicating, there were a lot of people with the best intentions who joined the DSA, thinking that this was going to be the vehicle. It was bound up, as you remember, I'm sure, with the Sanders campaign, et cetera. But after Sanders capitulated to Biden again in 2020, after he did the same thing in 2016, there was a lot of disillusionment. I think what you're seeing now in the DSA, and the fact that they've got to bring in people from the Pentagon to try and whip up support for the war among the DSA's members, is, again, this basic dynamic that the DSA is trying the best that it possibly can, and it's not working very well for them right now. But to take people who are moving in a leftward direction and basically to try and trap them back in the Democratic Party. It's an age-old story. The Democratic Party is a bourgeois party with tremendous levels of political experience and ruthlessness. That's what they're doing now. And what you see in particular on the question of the war with Ukraine is when Ocasio-Cortez and the rest of the squad, as they call themselves, go out and vote to give $40 billion to the Azov battalion. There's a tremendous amount of opposition, I think correct opposition, which has emerged within their organization over that. Now, what would we say in terms of the socialist way to respond? I mean, this just proves again and again, there is no point whatsoever in wasting any energy in working within the Democratic Party, no matter how you want to justify it with an inside-outside, type of justification, as they often do. This is the role that the DSA plays, and it serves to shift the balance of power in the bourgeois political system ever further to the right. This has been the process that's been playing out in the U.S. for the last 30, 40 years.
Yeah, I have seen those things happen with DSA. I haven't seen those things happen with Socialist Alternative, though. And I know several people that are part of Socialist Alternative, and they've actually been told multiple times that we condemn the Democratic Party. So I haven't seen that. Do you have evidence to support that, by the way, that they've been pushing people to join the Democratic Party? I'm just curious.
No, yes, absolutely. So like I said, in 2020, when the Socialist Alternative announced its, and if there's someone who's watching who wants to Google the article that Kayla and I wrote on Workers Strike Back, yes, the Socialist Alternative is basically at the exact moment in 2018, 19, 20, when the crisis within the DSA began to build up. Because keep in mind, when tens of thousands of people joined this organization after, in particular, Ocasio-Cortez was elected, the hopes were very high. Okay, so in this moment, Socialist Alternative joined the DSA, and when you take a political when you make a political decision like that, you take political responsibility for the implications of it. Now everybody is seeing that the DSA is nothing but a faction of the Democratic Party, nothing but a part of the imperialist military and industrial complex. It's crushing the railroad strike. And I think that the effort by Sawant and Socialist Alternative to form a new organization now, like I said, is basically an attempt to distract from the fact that they've just expended a tremendous amount of political capital promoting the Democratic Socialists of America and giving it left bona fides at precisely the moment when the DSA is in crisis. So if you want more evidence of Sawant's specific role as a Democrat, she's been to Democratic Party fundraisers. I don't want to turn this into I mean, if you want to talk more about Socialist Alternative, I'm happy to. But there's a tremendous amount of evidence of her role as a supporter of the Democratic Party. I think if you want to look at what she said about Ocasio-Cortez and Jayapal in particular, and consider that it's not a question of making a personal judgment on her as an individual, but a political judgment about the perspective which emerges from such decisions like joining the DSA at precisely the moment it's preparing. It's really significant effort to crush the class struggle here and prosecute the interests of American imperialism abroad.
When was that statement made about AOC and Pramila Jayapal? I'm just curious.
If you Google Eric London, Kayla Costa, Socialist Alternative, I'm happy to send the link to you there. All the quotes, all the dates are in there. I think it was from within the last 10 years. It was certainly from the last 10 years. I think it was from the last 5, but you're...
Okay, but see, that's the problem, Eric. See, this is the thing. Right now it's 2023. Organizations change, people change. I mean, someone can go back years prior and say, Sabrina Salvati once supported Barack Obama, which is no secret. Yes, I did. We all move at our time, right? We move away from certain things. There are a lot of us that supported Obama that would not support a Democrat today. So I think that's why I'm trying to get an idea of how soon this...
You take ownership for it.
Huh?
But you've learned from it. You're proving in what you're saying that that's an experience you went through. Tons of people go through experiences like that.
Right. And she never denied that she did believe in and support AOC and Pramila Jayapal. She's never denied that. A lot of us did back then because we believed that they were going to fight and they were going to do the right thing. But as time has gone by, I watched Shama Sawant publicly criticize DSA on Twitter recently. Multiple times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Because like I said, they're trying to produce another trap. And so when you have, for example, now let's take the organization Socialist Alternative. This is also an organization that has celebrated the ending of restrictions on the spread of the pandemic in China. This is the Socialist Alternative was attending rallies with imperialist organizations across the United States to celebrate this anti-China hysteria, which the US government is attempting to whip up over the question of the ending of the pandemic. I mean, these things we have to take these organizations. We're not talking about individuals. Individuals, of course, have the right to make mistakes, but political organizations, if they do make mistakes, they have to make an appraisal of them. So if you do tell your entire organization or a substantial portion of it to get behind Pramila Jayapal and Ocasio-Cortez and to join the DSA, and then the DSA supports the suppression of a railroad strike and the illegalization of it and war against Russia, I would just say to your viewers and to you and to anybody else that if that hasn't been explained, and the Workers' Strike Back Initiative has not, there's been no explanation of the catastrophe of Socialist Alternative's entry into the DSA. They're pulling the wool over the eyes of their supporters, and that's not honest politics. That's covering for your past actions. It's not explaining them like you've done with your support for Obama. I mean, so I think that's the differentiation I would make there. I mean, the World Socialist website has been completely right about all of these people. We weren't fooled by Ocasio-Cortez. We weren't fooled by Pramila Jayapal. We aren't fooled by the Congressional Progressive Caucus. We've been opponents of this war since the second it was conjured up in 2014, well, even before then, but in 2014, 2015. We're never backing U.S. State Department promotion of anti-Chinese hysteria. So, I mean, I get what you're saying, and I recognize that there are many people in Socialist Alternative who do really think that they're fighting for socialism. But the point is that I would ask them, then why did their organization support joining the DSA as the DSA is moving to the right? I would ask those questions.
That's an interesting question. I will say they have fought for actions on the ground as well, as like the Fight for 15 in Seattle. That's kind of how I came to know of Socialist Alternative, is because they were fighting for actions on the grounds and for workers' rights, not because of anything to do with the DSA, to be honest with you. But I want to pivot on to this discussion here because I know you wanted to talk about this as well. Now, there was an article recently that was published by the World Socialist website. It says the Rage Against the War Machine rally, a reactionary political freak show. Now, I know you did not write this. You are not Jacob or Joseph.
I stand by it, though. We could talk about it.
Yeah, I was like, I just want to make that clear to people that you didn't write this article. But it seems to appear that the World Socialist website was not in agreement with this rally. Now, I was at this rally. I did cover this event. I even said so when I talked about this on Rising earlier this morning. I do not agree with all the people that were chosen as speakers, but I was not an organizer. So if I wanted to do something different, I can organize my own event. That was my thing. But that didn't stop me or deter me from going to the event. So I do want to ask, why do you specifically disagree with this event?
Okay, good question. And I think if we're both anti-imperialists and we both oppose the escalation of the war, we can have a frank discussion about what the issues involved are here. Because all around the world right now, there is an emerging movement of the working class taking place against the war. It takes place at various levels of understanding. But if you look across Latin America, for example, you look across Asia, even across Western Europe, mass demonstrations, mass strikes taking place over the rising cost of living. If you want to talk about the disastrous impact this war is having on the working class of the world, there was a study in Nature at the end of last year, and I'll get to your point, that said that the impact of the rising cost of fertilizer alone due to the American sanctions is going to kill between 400,000 and 1.1 million people a year, so long as the conflict continues. So the question is, how are we going to build a movement, and what social force is powerful enough to take down American imperialism and all of its allies and vassal states like France and Germany and the United Kingdom? And the answer is the international working class. And it's not, and that is a very different, that's the perspective which the World Socialist website's been fighting for. It's a very different perspective, to be honest, than the perspective which was put forward last weekend in Washington, because you're not going to win over workers in Latin America to join the fight against war by being allied with Jackson Hinkle, who calls for their deportation. You're not going to win support among the working class of the world in an alliance with the Libertarian Party, which wants to have unbridled corporate exploitation. And after all, that's what drives American imperialism. So I think that the questions that really, we're in an extraordinarily dangerous situation. I think you and your viewers recognize that too. Just today, the ending of the pulling out of the START treaty, which was provoked by the Americans and by NATO. I mean, we're headed towards a situation which could be the end of human civilization. But that just means that the questions of political perspective, we're not oriented to the middle class, to disaffected right-wing elements who want to bring Donald Trump back to power. And remember, he was bombing Syria too. He was bombing North Africa too. I'm not presenting Biden as any way to the left of him, really, but he was the one who was talking about fire and fury in North Korea. Jackson Hinkle wants to give him the control of the nuclear codes again. So the main point.
So you don't support the rally because Jackson Hinkle was a speaker?
No, it's not just about him. I mean, look at Tulsi Gabbard. She's not anti-war. She said in 2016 to the Honolulu newspaper that she is a hawk on the question of the war on terror. That I think that is, I don't have the exact month here, but when it comes to the war against terrorists, I'm a hawk. Interview with the Hawaii Tribune Herald. She opposes the release of the prisoners from Guantanamo on the grounds that they'll go back out and fight Americans. Now, it's not just about I mean, Ron Paul, you could say 100 things about what horrible positions he's taken over the years. It's not just about this or that individual. It's a question of what is our whole approach to how we're going to change workers' minds. The socialist position is that we're going to go into the working class and we're going to fight to mobilize and build a better understanding of what the factors are involved here, what the historical questions are. That's the way we're going to change workers' minds, not by tailing Trump supporters and fascists. I mean, there were Oath Keepers there. There were Atomwaffen people there. Do you think we're going to win the workers of Latin America to an anti-imperialist movement with people with Pinochet shirts on?
So look, here's the thing. I have to ask, because you keep using the term workers and working class. Who are you trying to unite with that's a part of the working class? Are you saying to exclude certain people with different political ideologies?
Well, no. I mean, the working class is a complete. We're talking about a working class that has 7 billion. There's 7 billion people in it, come from all different sorts of backgrounds. Under capitalism, there's all forms of different confusion, etc. The socialist movement has always fought to explain and to challenge the conceptions that dominate under capitalism. Will Lehman is a member of our movement. He ran for the president of the UAW. We just ran a campaign for the presidency of the United Auto Workers, and he won 5% of the vote on the basis of an anti-imperialist, anti-war program. We won a lot of votes from workers who happen to have also voted for Trump. But we win support for socialism, but that was an explicitly socialist campaign that was run. But we win support for socialism not by adapting ourselves to the right-wing forces that exist and that are part of the political establishment, but by fighting to expose and explain why the fight that workers are undertaking for the rising wage, to elevate wages, over conditions of life, over living conditions, they're not going to be established. They're not going to be met by so long as these right-wing tendencies dominate. They don't dominate, in fact, in the working class. There aren't hundreds of thousands of Proud Boys out there. That's exactly why we feel that the socialist movement has an absolutely necessary, excellent opportunity to change workers' minds. So that's not going to be done by adapting to those far-right forces. It's not.
Okay, couple of things. One, it seems like you were okay getting votes from Trump supporters, but you don't want them at this rally. Two,
those workers.
Well, wait a minute. Let me finish. Two, I can assure you, especially here in Massachusetts, if you go out to some of these mill towns where they still have factories and manufacturing, there are a lot of right-wing working class people. And three, you mentioned Latin America, and I want to be very specific about that, because a lot of the organizing and uniting that's happened, at least in the global South, has been over the economic issues, not the social issues. We've covered that on this show multiple times. So you have people who may consider themselves to be left-wing, may consider themselves to be more conservative in the global South. But where they come together is on those economic issues. You look at countries like Denmark, you look at countries like Germany, look at countries like the UK, you look at countries like France. The reason why they're able to get 50,000 people out in the streets is over the economic issues. So you can have 50,000 people in Denmark come out in the streets and protest and say, hey, you're taking a holiday away from us. Oh, and by the way, you are not going to give more aid, more military aid to the military industrial complex. All of those people are not on the left. When you look at the real anti-war movement that we had in this country back during the Vietnam protests, all those protesters were not on the left. So I'm really confused here, because I think it sounds like you want to have a class movement, but you want certain people excluded from the movement. And that's not how organizing works when you're trying to organize over economic issues. Look at someone like Chris Smalls, who organized the workers at the Amazon warehouse. What if Chris Smalls would have said, no, all of you guys who are Trump supporters, you can't be a part of this. I'm only going to organize the people who are on the left. It would have fallen apart. So you can't have a class movement, Eric, by isolating certain people. And when it comes to an anti-war movement, yes, you can unite with people over that particular issue. That doesn't mean they agree with you on every other issue. There were people out there marching with us in the streets over the George Floyd incident, for the George Floyd protest, that did not agree with me on Medicare for all, did not agree with me on canceling student loan debt, but they agreed with me on that one issue. If you're going to look for people who agree with you on every single particular issue, you are not going to have a mass movement in this country. I'm sorry, I have to push back on that.
All right, that's fine, but I'll push back on what you've just said, because look, it's not the way that you're presenting it, I would say, is wrong. Because it's not just a question of, the socialist movement doesn't take the level at which workers currently are as the end all be all. Okay. Now you have a rally over the weekend. You invite people who are Nazis, not you personally inviting them, but there was a rally that was held. Chris Hedges, who had once presented himself as someone who
we have to stop there. There was no, wait a minute, there were no Nazis that were speakers at that rally. I was at the rally. There were no Nazis that were speakers at that rally. So you need to clarify.
No, I'm not clarifying. There was a substantial presence of far-right elements, including people like the well, okay, you want to talk about who? What about Jackson Hinkle? Who were the people who were calling the shots that he was referencing? This is
You're saying, wait a minute. I think you need to be very careful here, Eric. You are making a statement on this show that people are watching live, and you're saying that Jackson Hinkle is a Nazi?
Look, this was an event which was held explicitly with open arm. What I was just about to say was that Chris Hedges wrote an article talking about how Oath Keepers and Proud Boys would be welcome at this event. He said that. I think it was actually in a statement he made subsequent to the initial article. Now, what he said is actually very interesting because this gets to the heart of the issue that you're raising. Hedges said the following. He said, "We will not topple corporate power and the war machine alone. There has to be a left-right coalition which will include people whose opinions are not only unpalatable, but even repugnant." And then he says, or we will remain marginalized and ineffectual. And then he says the following. He says, "Because we urgently need as many voices as possible from a broad variety of perspectives to speak out so that we can be much more effective at pressuring Congress and the White House to move this conflict from the bloody battlefield to the negotiating table." Look, this conflict is not going to end because of pressure on Joe Biden. It's going to end if there's a movement in the working class based on socialist, anti-imperialist principles. And to the extent that there are those out there who do not realize that that's in their class interest, then it's the obligation of the socialist movement to fight for that and to explain that. And no, not to adapt to people like Jackson Hinkle who call for the mass deportation of immigrant workers. What a horrific betrayal of the interests of the international working class it is.
Look, I read that article.
He somehow left anti-war. When you appeal to someone like that and call him anti-war, you legitimize the far right, and they will come next.
Listen, I read that article by Chris Hedges. I have many criticisms about Jackson Hinkle. This is not a secret, but I think it is a stretch. You have to be careful when you come onto this show and you explicitly call him a Nazi.
Do you think
this is not about. No. There's a difference between Chris Hedges' article and Chris. There's a difference between Chris Hedges' article and Chris Hedges saying, "I openly welcome certain people to this event," and you explicitly saying that Jackson Hinkle is a Nazi. I think you need to be careful with that.
How do you think it impacts the ability of the anti-war movement in the United States to explain that the Ukrainian government is filled with Banderaites who are Nazis? How do you think it helps the anti-war movement when then you associate with fascists like Jackson Hinkle? All right. So
listen, I have many criticisms, as I've stated before, even before the rally and after. I was not an organizer for this rally. There are certain speakers that I myself would have not invited. I just had that conversation earlier this morning on Rising. Okay, I was not an organizer for this. But I will say this. I think you have to be very careful when you make those kind of statements and you don't have any evidence to back that up, Eric. That's what I'm saying.
No evidence when someone is a supporter of Donald Trump and talks about purging liberalism and globalists. I mean, you're just defending them.
Okay, no, listen, Eric, wait a minute, Eric. I know several people, Eric, I know several, wait a minute now. I know several people that supported Donald Trump. Wait a minute. I know several people who voted for Obama twice and then turned around and voted for Donald Trump. Not everyone who supported Trump is a Nazi. Do not come on here with that rhetoric. Don't do it.
Listen to this. When we campaign in the working class, we talk to people with a lot of different ideas. Okay, we talk to people who voted for Obama. We talk to people who voted for Trump. And we don't adapt to either one of those like you're adapting to people like Jackson Hinkle.
I'm not adapting to anybody. First of all, you don't know. Wait a minute. You don't know what you're talking about. I have had many.
If you're associated with people like
that, I have had many.
Because they're
Eric,
not war.
Eric, I have had many criticisms of Jackson Hinkle. This is not a secret. What you are doing, Just a couple minutes ago, you told me it was not about the speakers or the personalities, but you keep bringing up the speakers and the personalities. So that's really what it was about. Let me tell you something. There was a march for Medicare for All. There was a march for Medicare for All 2 years ago in 50 cities across this country that I was a part of. And the same thing you're doing right now, wait a minute, the same thing that you're doing right now is the exact same thing.
Getting rid of all social.
Eric, I'm going to ask you to let me speak. The same thing that you're doing right now is the exact same thing that people did in reference to that event. They criticized some of the speakers. They criticized the fact that there were people who agreed with Medicare for All, who were not lefties. There were people who were conservative. One of the speakers, Dr. Joseph Jarvis, who is a conservative, supports Medicare for All. And he's spoken about this publicly multiple times because he's done the data and the math. There are people who organized those events who were heavily criticized and attacked because there were people that were a part of those marches that were not leftists. When we ask for Medicare for All, that doesn't just mean give it to people on the left. It's for everybody. Everyone in this country needs health care. So what I'm trying to say to you, Eric, is as an activist and as an organizer, I've heard these criticisms with every single event that has been organized by people, by some people on the left and other people who are not politically involved at all. There's always these attacks. Who's the speaker? Who's the this? Who's the blah? And what I'm trying to say to you is this, is that we do not have an anti-war movement in this country right now. We have not had one as large since the Vietnam War protests. You are not going to have a massive anti-war movement in this country if you only want lefties to be a part of it. Because guess what, Eric? Some of the lefties don't even call themselves anti-war anymore, and they are actually for this war in Russia and Ukraine. That is what I'm trying to get you to understand. If you have issues and criticisms, with Jackson Hinkle, you take that up with Jackson Hinkle.
I have no interest in that. What I'm saying is the way to build a movement that is capable of taking down American imperialism is to fight for a socialist perspective in the international working class. It's got to be international. And you're never, ever in a million years going to be able to build a movement with such vile nationalists like the people who are on that stage. They are not anti-war. They are not anti-war.
Who's the nationalist?
Oh, come on. I mean, you don't think MAGA communism constitutes nationalism?
Listen, I've said it again. You keep bringing up Jackson Hinkle, but you keep saying it's not about Jackson Hinkle. And that's really what this is about for you, Eric. So my advice is this. As I've said before, I have many criticisms of Jackson Hinkle, which I've discussed before on the show and has been discussed with him face to face. And I think the difference is, if I had organized this event, like I said, there are some people that I personally would not have invited. I did not organize the event, but I'm not going to let the fact that maybe I don't agree with one of the speakers from stopping me from attending the event. We need to stop a nuclear war from happening. We need to stop World War III from happening. And right now, I really ain't got time for the purity test, Eric. I really don't have time for it. This is a life or death situation. So none of this matters. You understand? Jackson Hinkle, all these other people that you are attacking, that you're criticizing, that you have issues with, all this whole thing about who you can work with, who you can't work with. At the end of the day, none of it matters if we are all dead because of a nuclear war.
Well, the way that you're proceeding isn't going to stop that. You've only legitimized the far right.
Well, then you know what, Eric? You go ahead and you organize your own rally.
As we have been on the World Socialist website.
Eric, I employ you. I employ you to organize your own rally that only consists of socialists.
No, as you can find out on the World Socialist website, and all your viewers can as well. The World Socialist website and the International Committee of the Fourth International have been organizing anti-war demonstrations against this war in every single country where we have sections. We're proud of it. We're proud that we have not done so while legitimizing fascists, as the organization that you're a part of has done this last weekend. And We have a very different
organization. I'm not a part of this org. What are you talking about?
Event, the Rage Against the War Machine event.
I think not an organization, Eric. It's an event.
All right. Well, it certainly presented a perspective of propping up the far right. And those of your viewers who are interested in fighting against imperialism, you got to do it with people who are anti-war. And that isn't what happened last week.
Okay. And good luck with finding a massive movement like that on the left. Eric, thank you so much for your time. I really do implore you to take that conversation up with Jackson Hinkle. But seriously, you need to be careful. You need to be careful about coming onto people's shows and saying things like so-and-so is a Nazi, and you don't have something to back that up.
I think I did. I think I did back it up.
Okay. All right. Eric, thank you so much for your time.
I do appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
All righty. Jesus. Jeez Louise. Oh my God. Like I said before multiple times, I've had many criticisms about Jackson Hinkle, but you have to be very careful when you make those kind of statements about people. You have to be very careful.